Hi, this is Joy at Red Pine Quilt Shop. This morning we are talking about laminated fabric and working with laminated fabric. We carry some amazing laminated fabrics here at the shop. They're from Splash Fabrics out on the West Coast, and they are really nice, soft, supple, easy to work with laminated fabrics. So this is actually a true fabric. It's a regular 100% cotton fabric. You're looking at the back side of it here. And it has actually had a water-based polyurethane coating applied to it and heat set right into the cotton. So it is a very nice laminated fabric. It's great to work with, and we really like how soft it is to the touch. So this fabric is a laminate, so it is waterproof, and you can use it for bags, you can use it for totes. Great for a lot of those things. The nice thing about a laminated fabric is you can wipe it off. If it gets dirty, it's an easy wipe off. This fabric can actually be put in the washing machine. You can wash it, you can dry it. You can actually iron this fabric on a low heat setting, which is very unusual. Most laminates, you wouldn't dare touch them with an iron, and this fabric can actually even be ironed on low if you need to do that. So it's a wonderful product. We really like this particular laminated fabric. So when you are working with laminated fabric, there's a couple things that you want to think about, and you want to change up a little bit when you're sewing with it. So the first thing that you want to do is to use a longer stitch on your sewing machine. And I bumped mine up to 3.0 millimeters, and I felt like that worked pretty well. So you want to do a longer stitch so that you're not perforating the fabric a whole bunch. You also typically, especially for bags and purses, and that applies to bags and purses made with cotton fabric, linen, decorator fabrics, any bags and purses, I really encourage you to go to a heavier weight thread. So you want to do a thread that's at least a 40 weight or heavier. And I would recommend that you use a polyester thread. They just tend to be, polyester is a stronger thread than 100% cotton. So anytime I'm making bags or purses, I always pull out my 100% poly and do a little heavier weight thread. A jeans thread actually works really well on bags like this as well. So when you're working with this laminated fabric and heavier threads, I would encourage you to use one of these two needles. These are both the super nonstick needles from Schmetz. They glide through the laminated fabric so easily. And there are actually two sizes there. One is a 90-14 and the other one is a 100-16. If you're doing smaller projects and you're just sewing zippers in, I would actually probably do the 90-14. If you are doing projects like the tote bag that you see here, that actually has these webbing handles on it, so you're going to be sewing not just through the laminate, but also through that tough nylon webbing, then you definitely are going to want that size 100 needle. Just having a heavier needle, it makes it easier to penetrate through those stiffer materials like the webbing, and the super nonstick needles are great for going through the laminated fabric. And then when you're working with a bigger needle like that, the nice thing too is it allows you to use those heavier threads, which you typically are going to want to be using with this kind of a project, just to make sure that your thread is strong. So when you're working with a laminated fabric, one thing that's really nice about it is you do not have to finish your edges. This fabric is not going to run, it's not going to fray. You can actually just leave your edges raw and not have to worry about it. So it really is quick and easy to make a bag with this fabric, because you don't have to do any of the French seams that you typically see in bags or zigzagging edges. You can just leave the edges raw, which I will show you in my bag. I've just left those edges raw, and it is going to be just fine to leave those edges raw and not have to do anything fancy to finish the edges, which is just a nice convenience factor. So if you have a bag pattern that was written for cotton fabric and you are going to use the laminate to make it instead, you can definitely skip over all of those edge finishing steps that might be in the pattern. So it's easy to adapt a pattern to using this fabric. So we're going to talk a little bit about some of the projects that are available for this fabric. We carry the fabric here in the shop. It comes from Splash Fabrics, and they have a number of patterns available that are free patterns you can grab from their website. We have them available here at the shop as well, and they are great projects that were written for the laminated fabric, but really can, could be done in other things, but they're great projects for the laminated fabric. So the first one, that's one of my absolute favorites, is this big beach bag. This is kind of a remake of the big blue IKEA tote, and it's kind of nice because it's got shoulder strap handles and it's got grab handles both. So I can do it over my shoulder, or I can just grab the bag. This big beach bag, like I said, is kind of a remake of that big blue IKEA tote, if you've ever seen those. And they say that it will hold 7 beach towels, and I actually have 4 packages of batting in it, and it's holding that nicely too. So it makes a great, nice, big shopping tote. This cute little tub is a reversible little organizer bin, and he is a really nice little bin that you can use as just an organizer. You can use it for storing things. It would make a great little craft basket. I said I could definitely put my knitting and crocheting yarn and stuff in here and work out of that little bin. So a handy little organizer tote. And the project that I'm working on right now that we're going to talk a little bit more about is actually the Denny tote, which is another one of the free patterns. And it is going to be my farmer's market shopping bag, and it's just a nice crossbody tote. So I want to talk about a couple of things that we'll do kind of looking at this bag. So the first thing is the fact that when you're working with laminated fabric, you don't want to put pinholes in it. So I would definitely say this is the time to get out your Wonder Clips. Use your Wonder Clips as much as you can to avoid putting pinholes in the fabric. So definitely plan to do that. The thing that you'll run into though sometimes is you'll have something like this pocket. And I'll just go ahead and rotate this around so you guys can see it. But there's actually a pocket that's going to be on the inside of this bag. You're looking at the inside here. Here's the outside, but here is this pocket. So when you have something like this, you can't use your Wonder Clips to hold it in place. But I still don't want to put pinholes in my fabric. So what I did is I glue basted it in place with my Rack Sounds glue baste. It worked great. It held it plenty well for me to go ahead and get my pocket stitched down. So definitely for interior things, consider glue basting them rather than pinning, because you really can't get in here with your Wonder Clips, but the glue works well. So it's a great alternative option to do the glue. So I want to show you guys a little trick that I find works well for me when I am working on placing something like this pocket. So the pattern said that this pocket should be 6 inches down from the top of the bag, and this is my top opening of my bag, and centered. And what I like to do is actually take my long strip cutting ruler, and this ruler is 6.5 inches long. So what I will actually do is I will line it up and leave a 1/2 inch over, so I'm just lining it up with the top of my bag. And then when I go to place that pocket, I can just butt it right up against the edge of that ruler, and I know that I'm getting my pocket straight. I'm getting it 6 inches down from the top like the pattern directed, and I'll go ahead and place my pocket. Then I'm going to take a second ruler and I'm going to work and make sure I get it centered. I can actually use this ruler to center the top of my pocket, but I would take a second ruler and check that the bottom of my pocket was centered as well, just to make sure I don't have it a little crooked, that I've got it nice and square before I glue it down. So I use this ruler to get it started. I double checked my measurements here and here, and then I went ahead and I glue basted down the one side, got that laid out, and then I did the bottom and the other side. So that's an easy way to get a pocket like this. That's an interior pocket placed accurately. The next thing that I want to talk about is when you go to cut your boxed corners. And this is going to have a box corner on the end. And the one thing that I like to always do is to make sure that I have my fabric lined up. So I'm going to line up this corner and I'm going to clip it. And I've already got clips here, but I smoothed the fabric out. I clipped, I smoothed, I clipped. So I made sure that when I cut this corner, I don't have an uneven area of fabric between my top and my bottom. And I would do the same thing on the other side. You want to make sure that you have it nice and square going into those bottom corners. So this pattern calls for a boxed corner. And I like to use the boxed bag template to cut those because it lets me cut them with a rotary cutter and it does my measuring for me. So I will use the boxed bag template to do this. You can do it with a regular ruler too and mark a line and scissor cut it. But the nice thing with this is I can actually rotary cut it. So I can take this and line it up. And the pattern calls for a 3-inch box this way and a 3.5-inch box this way, because this is the side of my bag and I'm going to have a seam that's going to get sewn there. So they will ultimately both end up being 3-inch box corners, but I can lay that out, and now with a 45mm cutter I could rotary cut that notched corner. So it works out well to do it with this, or mark a line with a regular ruler. And then I usually recommend probably scissor cutting it. You can rotary cut part way and then scissor cut the end right in the corner if you need to as well. So those are a couple tips for doing your box corners. The next thing that I want to talk about is working with strapping. So anytime you're working with this nylon webbing or strapping for handles, you have to do a couple of different things. When you cut it to the length, you want to always cinch it with a match or a cigarette lighter. You want to put a little heat on the edge of that webbing because you can see how that's fraying out because I haven't burnt it yet. Same thing here. I would clean cut that and I would just singe the end to seal it, and that works great with any kind of nylon type of webbing. But you want to make sure you do that so your straps don't start to fray out in your bag. The other recommendation that I always make is that you purchase additional strapping and webbing over what the pattern calls for. I would always purchase at least an extra 1/4 yard because we all are different sizes, different heights. We all like bags to hang in a different spot, and it's nice to be able to adjust the length and have a little extra if you find you want to make those handles a little bit longer. So before I sewed the handles on this bag, I actually put them in place. I just clipped them on with my Wonder Clips to hold them enough that I could actually sling this bag over my shoulder and make sure that I was happy with the length of these handles. I actually lengthened these handles a couple inches over what the pattern called for, the little grab handles, because I wanted a little more of a loop, and if I really had the bag loaded up, I didn't want to have to pull them so close together and wanted a little more handle there. So definitely check that before you cut your handles to length, and buy a little extra so if you want to bump it longer, you have the option to do that. So when I went to sew these handles on, because I was working on the laminated fabric, I didn't want to do a lot of back stitching and be punching more holes in the fabric. So I actually took a single stitch and I pulled my bobbin thread. Now I was sewing on the inside because I needed to be able to see that webbing. And I took a single stitch and I pulled my bobbin thread to the back side before I started to sew. So for something like this, I would sew around the square, and then I would sew an X And now here's where I'm going to actually double stitch. I'm going to have one little area of double stitching because I have to cross over to the other side and then come down the other side of the X. And then again, leave a long tail. I recommend you not use the thread cutter on your sewing machine because the tails will be too short to tie off. And I actually knotted those tails off on the inside of the bag, and I didn't do a lot of back stitching. So you need to either knot your ends like I did, or you need to back stitch those because you don't want that stitching to come loose. So when I started to do this, I wanted to match my colors up. So I put blue thread in my bobbin and I put black thread on the top of my machine. And what I found is when I started stitching, it was so hard to tell where I was. So I actually recommend that you draw a square with a chalk marker like this. Chalk is probably the best bet for a strap like this. Draw a square, mark your X, so you have something to follow when you're sewing, especially if you're matching your thread color to your webbing so that you can see, because especially when you have to double stitch that one little area, you really have to be able to tell where that first row of stitches were so that you can sew pretty close on top of them. So it's helpful to go ahead and mark that first. So just a couple suggestions when you are working with your strapping. And this works good too, to just kind of mark your webbing before you cut it. When you're checking your lengths, I would mark it while I was checking to see if I wanted to make my shoulder strap longer, and I know how much the pattern said to call, so it shows up nicely on the webbing. So that is another suggestion. Now, when you are working on your bag and you're doing something like the finished edge to this pocket, where I had to turn the fabric over to finish my edge, or when I get ready to do the top edge of the bag, there's a couple of different tools that you can use to do that. You can definitely use your hot presser because you can press this. Like I said, this can be pressed on low. And the nice thing with the hot ruler is it lets you measure. So this is supposed to be turned under 2 inches. So I can actually measure. I wouldn't have that second layer underneath there, but I can actually measure, and I could press this on low with my iron if I wanted to. The other thing that you can use is you can use a little hemming tool like this. And this works by setting it at the 2-inch mark. And then you simply butt it up against the raw edge of the fabric, and I'm going to push it over until this is lined up here. And then I would just kind of finger crease it and go ahead and put wonder clips on to mark the top seam allowance, and that will work as well. So that is another option for when you have to turn an edge under for either the top of a bag or a pocket or something like that. So we wanted to give you guys some tips and tricks for working with a laminated fabric, for working with bags in general. Like I said, working with the strapping handles and things like that. So we hope that you found some helpful information in this video, some things that will make your bag making easier. And the items that we're showing, such as the laminated fabric and the various tools, you can find them all on our website at www.redpinequiltshop.com. So www.redpinequiltshop.com. You can find all of these items. Thank you for joining us today. Have a wonderful rest of your day.